So in yesterday's lesson, we talked about how to solve quadratic equations using the completing the square method. We talked about the fact that anytime there's a b value, I cannot just use square roots to solve, that I either am going to have to factor and use bottoms up and then set my factors equal to 0, or I'm going to have to solve by completing the square when the bottoms up will not work. Completing the square will work all the time. So if we look here at number 1, the first step when we do this is to make sure that the problem is equal to, we just want to group when we complete the square our values that are alike. So I have x squared and x. We're going to group those two things together, and we're going to get rid of the value that is not alike. So the constant that does not have a variable, it's adding, so to move it, I'm going to subtract 15 from each side, which will mean that I'm left with x squared minus 8x plus something we'll put in. And if I put something in, then I must also take it out. And then 4 minus 15 gives me negative 11. At this point, it becomes normal completing the square. My b value is negative 8. Half of negative 8 is negative 4. And negative 4 squared is 16. So I will put into the problem negative 4 squared. And I also will be taking out the 16. Well, at this point, all I have to do is condense. So when I condense, I have x minus 4 squared minus 16 equals negative 11. What I'll have to do here is try and get the x squared, the parentheses x minus 4 squared by itself. And I'm going to do that by adding 16 to each side, where I'll have x minus 4 squared is equal to 5. Remember, to get rid of the squared, we must take the square root of each side. And anytime I take the square root of a number, I'm going to have two answers. I'm going to have a positive version and a negative version. So I'll have plus or minus the square root of 5. Remember, we're almost done, but not quite, because I cannot leave x minus 4 on the left side of my equation. So in this case, because I have a radical left in the problem here, I'm just going to add 4. And I cannot combine a positive 4 and a square root of 5. Those terms are not alike. So my final answer will be x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 5 plus 4. So now that you've reviewed, take a second, pause this video, and try number 2. All right, we want to group the things that are alike, which would be the 2x squared and the positive 4x. We're going to add 12 to each side. So I'll have 2x squared plus 4x, but remember my a value is no longer equal to 1, so I need to factor out what my a value is. 2x squared divided by 2 is going to leave me with x squared. 4x divided by 2 is going to be 2x. Then I'm going to put something into the problem. Remember, if I put something in, I have to keep it balanced, so I'm also going to take it out. And then negative 6 plus 12 gives me 6. So my b value here is now 2. So half of 2 is 1. 1 squared is 1. So I'll be putting into the problem 1 squared. And I'll be taking out 1 squared is 1, but I have to remember that I also need to multiply it by the 2 here because it's what was factored out. So condense x plus 1 squared minus 2 times 1 is 2 is going to equal 6. Okay, then we need to solve. I'm going to add 2 to each side. Where I'll have x plus 1 squared is equal to 8. To get rid of the squared, we will take the square root. And in this case, we have to remember that the square root of 8 can be simplified. So if you're using your factor trees, you would have 8 is factors of, or the factors are 2 and 4, and the factors of 4 are 2 and 2. So I'll be left with x plus 1 is equal to, anytime we take a square root, we have to have two answers. So plus or minus 2 on the square root of 2. Because I have a radical and I know that I cannot simplify, I'll subtract 1 from each side, and I'll know x is equal to plus or minus 2 on the square root of 2 minus 1. For the last one, we want to group together the things that are alike. So my x squared and my 10x. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 88 from each side. Get rid of that. Where I'll have x squared minus 10x plus something. Again, if I put it in, then I have to also take it out. And that's going to equal negative 94. Identify your b value. b equals negative 10. Half of that, negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. Negative 5 squared is 25. So I'll put in negative 5 squared. I'll take out 25. When I condense, the x minus 5 squared minus 25 equals negative 94. I'm going to add 25 to each side. X minus 5 squared will equal negative 69. To get rid of the squared, we want to take the square root, and at this point we can stop, because anytime I can take the square root of a negative number, I know that the answer is no solution. Now let's go back for a moment as I went back to check the work. At number 2, if you notice, I left off a large part of the answer for number 2. Let's look here. I factored out a 2, but when I got down to the second step, I did not take out the 2. So we need to go back and rework this at this step and actually do that. So we just said I had factored out a 2, but I didn't do it on the problem there. So let's make sure we do that. Let's go back and solve from this step. I'm going to add 2, where I get 2 times x plus 1 squared equals 8. Then I must get rid of the 2. So at that point, I will have x plus 1 squared equals 4. Remember, to get rid of the square root, or to get rid of the squared, we take the square root. This is where we must be careful, because I'll have x plus 1 equals positive or negative 2. So x plus 1 equals positive 2, my answer will be x equals 1. X plus 1 equals negative 2, my answer becomes x equals negative 3. I apologize for leaving that step off. That shows you how easy it is to do, so make sure you're checking your work at every point. So today what we're going to look at is solving using the quadratic formula. We've talked about all the different ways, so solving by using the factoring method where we use bottoms up, we set our factors equal to 0 and solve. The square root method where I know there's no b value, therefore I can solve using our square roots. Completing the square will work anytime. And then the final method that will work anytime for us as well is the quadratic formula. Here is our quadratic formula. It's very important that we know how to use this. The first step is to make sure that our problem is equal to 0. So as I'm looking, if it says the equation equals 0, then I can move into step 2, which is identify your a, b, and c values. Once you've identified a, b, and c, then you simply want to plug into this formula. Now the good news is you don't have to memorize this. The only thing that you have to know is how to use it, because this formula is provided for you on the formula sheet of the EOC. It'll be under quadratics. So let's start by going through and practicing numbers 1 through 4, making sure our problem is equal to 0, and then identifying our A, B, and C values. For number 1, I can see very clearly that this is not equal to 0, it's equal to 3x. So what I'm going to do is work smarter, not harder, and I'm going to move the 3x. I'm going to move 3x over to be with the other two terms. Now, if you notice, I put 3x in the middle because I'm going to try and keep this in standard form as much as possible. The right side will cancel, and I'll be left with 2x squared minus 3x plus 5 equals 0. So step 1, making sure my equation is set to 0, is done. For number 2 here, it's equal to 6. We know we don't want that, so I'm going to go ahead and subtract 6 from each side. Notice I lined it up with the other constant because that is where they will combine. Those are the like terms. So I have x squared plus 8x minus 2 equals 0. For number 3, notice that I have a 3 on the outside of my parentheses, so I'm going to want to distribute the 3. So I'll have 3x squared minus 6x plus 21. That is going to equal 0. Finally, for number 4, I can see that's not equal to 0, so I need to subtract 21. I'll combine the 21 with the 5 because they're like terms, where I'll have x squared minus 16 equals 0. Now the other part of this is to make sure that we can identify our A, B, and C values. We've been doing this for a long time, so hopefully that is simple for you. For number 1, A is equal to 2, B is equal to negative 3, C is equal to 5. For number 2, A is equal to 1, B is equal to 8, and C is equal to negative 2. For number 3, go ahead and pause the video and you try 3 and 4. For number 3, A is equal to 3, B is equal to negative 6, and C is equal to 21. For number 4, A is equal to 1. Notice there's not a B value, so B is equal to 0, and C is equal to negative 16. It is very important that we watch our signs here and make sure that we're keeping the signs where we need them to be. So now we get to actually use the quadratic formula. Remember we said first the problem has to equal 0. Second, we have to identify A, B, and C. And then third, we just want to substitute our values into the formula and use our calculator to help find the answer. So let's apply all of these rules to these next few problems. First thing I want you to make sure you do is you always have your quadratic formula handy where you can see it, because remember, it is provided to you. It's not something that you have to memorize. So x equals negative b plus or minus b squared, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a. So we look at number 3. I can see that's not equal to 0, so I need to make it equal to 0. Meaning I'm going to move the 2x over. Notice I put the 2x where it would combine to keep it in standard form. I like things in standard form so it's easy to identify my A, B, and C values. So x squared minus 2x minus 15 equals 0. The next step is to identify our A, B's, and C's. So A is 1, B is negative 2, C is negative 15. At this point, it becomes substitution into our quadratic formula. Now, I like to go through and anywhere I see a variable, use an open parenthesis. And you can tell this because notice that the negative b is going to always stay in the problem. So even if b is already negative, I still need to multiply it by a negative number. Also, it will help when I have to square that value, because remember, a negative times a negative should change to a positive, and if you don't use parentheses in the calculator, it will not calculate the correct value. So now we just got to go in and use our values. B is negative 2, goes here. B squared, so negative 2 squared, 4 times A times C, so negative 15, divided by 2 times A, that's 1. Now at this point, all you would want to do here is plug this into your calculator. You would, if you have the black calculator, hit the button that's box over box, box divided by box. That'll give you your division bar. Then you would just start typing negative, open parentheses, negative 2, close parentheses. You cannot do plus and minus in the calculator at the exact same time. So you would have to pick which one you want to do first. I typically use plus. So plus, and to create your square root, you want to do second x squared. Okay, second x squared. Then open parentheses, negative 2, close parentheses, squared, minus 4, open parentheses, 1, close parentheses, open parentheses, negative 15, close parentheses. At this point, you want to hit the over arrow so that you will stop the bar for your square root sign, and then hit the down arrow to go to the denominator, where you'll type in 2, open parentheses, 1, close parentheses. If you're using Desmos, which would be completely fine here, to create your division bar, you just want to hit the slash button that's beside the question mark, and you would type in the same thing. Now I want to show you what your calculator is doing. You do not have to show this work. You would just type in what the calculator has. So negative times negative 2 would give me positive 2, plus or minus the square root. Negative 2 squared is 4, minus 4 times 1 is 4, times negative 15 is negative 60. And all that's going to be divided by 2 times 1, which is 2. Well, I can see here now that I have 4 minus negative 60. That's like a keep change problem. So when I simplify, I have 2 plus or minus the square root of 64 over 2. Well, hopefully we know that the square root of 64 is 8. So I'm really having 2 plus or minus 8 divided by 2. As I get ready to write my answers, 2 plus 8 is 10. 10 divided by 2 is 5. So that's one of my two solutions. 2 minus 8 is negative 6. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. That's the other solution. Okay, moving on to number 6. Ask yourself, does this thing equal 0? And we can see that no, it doesn't. So I need to make it equal 0. So I'm going to subtract 9 from each side. I'll be left with 3x squared plus 5x plus 1 equals 0. Next step will be to identify our a, b's, and c's. So a equals 3, b equals 5, c equals 1. Then I just want to substitute my values into the quadratic formula. So negative b, and again, I'm going to use open parentheses to start with to make sure I'm not missing anything, times b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. My b value is 5, b squared is 5. Our a value is 3, and our c value is 1. So 2 times 3 in the denominator. Again, you can put all of this into your calculator. If you're using the black calculator, then you're just going to use the box over box button. And in order to get the square root, you'll do second x squared. If you're putting in Desmos, then you want to make sure that you just use the slash by the question mark. Remember, you cannot do plus and minus in the calculator at the same time. So you'll have to pick, do plus, and then if you don't want to retype the entire problem, you can just hit the up arrow, hit enter, it'll recopy the problem, and then just hit your back arrow until you get to the plus sign and change it to a minus. I don't have to see this work, just like here, the work that happened here all goes through the calculator, but I do want to show you what the calculator is doing. So negative times 5 gives me negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 minus 4 times 3 times 1 is 12, all over the square root of 6. So if I were to simplify that down, it would be negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 13 over 6. Well, here are my two answers. I can't combine the negative 5 with the square root of 13, so that would be my two answers. Pause the video and you try 7 and 8. We can see in number 7 that it's already equal to 0, so we just want to identify our A, B's, and C's. So A is equal to 4, B is equal to 9, C is equal to 9. All we have to do is substitute this into our quadratic formula. So negative B plus or minus B squared minus 4 times A times C all over 2 times A. So my B value is 9, A is 4, C is 9. A is 4. Again, put this into your calculator, let it simplify. If you want to see what your calculator is doing, it's negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 81 minus 16 times 9, which would be negative 144. All divided by 8, which would make this negative 9 plus or minus the square root of negative 63 over 8. Well, we know anytime that you have a negative inside of the radical, square root of a negative number, that you will get no solution. For number 8 here, I could move to either side. I'm going to keep things nice and positive, so I'm going to subtract x squared. I'm going to add x, and I'm going to subtract 1. So subtract x squared, add 1x, and subtract 1. The right side will cancel out. I'll be left with x squared plus 6x plus 9. That'll equal 0. My A value is 1, B will be 6, C will equal 9. Plug it into my formula. Negative B plus or minus the square root. B squared minus 4 times A times C, all divided by 2 times A. So negative 6, 6x squared minus 4 times 1 times 9, and 2 times 1 in the denominator. You can just put these things in your calculator and shoot the answers out. If you want to see what your calculator is doing, it's negative 6 plus or minus 36 minus 4 times 1 is 4 times 9 is 36. All divided by 2 times 1 is 2. Well, I can see that negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 0 divided by 2. The square root of 0 is just 0. So I get negative 6 divided by 2 plus 0, and negative 6 minus 0 divided by 2. My answers are actually going to end up being the same thing here, where x is equal to negative 3, and x is equal to negative 3.